everyone. Welcome to React Native Radio. I'm the host today, Nader Dabbit. Today on our panel, we have Gant Laborde.
Hello.
Peter Pikarczyk with the LaCroix.
What's up, everybody?
And our special guest today is Eli Perkins. Eli, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. And you're coming on today to talk about Fastlane. So we're really looking forward to this. A lot of people keep asking about this. This may be even the first of multiple episodes, depending on how much we cover here. But yeah, before we kick that off, though, do you want to give us an intro to who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, so I'm Eli. I've been an iOS developer for some 8-9 years now. Wow, that feels like a long time. I've been working on all things iOS. I started out usually writing a lot of Objective-C, did a little consulting here and there. I joined Venmo for a few years, 2014, and worked there. We worked on rewriting the app in Swift, which was a whole thing, but built out some really cool stuff there with everybody there. Since Venmo, I joined a company called Clubhouse, where I've been working on building out an awesome React Native app there. So I've been working with React Native now for a little over 2 years, and it's been a blast. It's been really cool to kind of take the knowledge I know from working with native iOS apps and apply that to a new kind of ecosystem with React Native.
Awesome. It's always my favorite to have someone on the show that's actually done native iOS development or native development in general, because you bring a unique perspective compared to like me as a JavaScript developer. And I think most of the panelists here are kind of coming from either a JavaScript background or I guess Gant with a combination of JavaScript and Ruby.
Yeah, I think that's something that's been really cool with the React Native community as well. I think they just as much as we native engineers kind of bring something to the JavaScript ecosystem, I think there's a lot that we've learned from the JavaScript ecosystem to kind of bring it back to native as well.
So since the topic is Fastlane, can you talk about really quickly, I guess, what Fastlane is and why people are even picking it up just as like a quick elevator pitch?
Yeah, totally. So Fastlane is a great way to build and ship your apps. I think one of the things that Fastlane really excels at is a big community behind it that has built out really awesome tooling to automate some of the more manual tasks towards shipping your apps. Traditionally, when you're trying to build and ship an iOS app to the App Store, you kind of have to go through this learning curve of, okay, where in Xcode do I go to make a new build, and what do I have to log into to push it? And Fastlane really puts the control back into your hands as a developer to do some nice scripting around different APIs to get your builds uploaded and ships apps to your customers. Yeah, and I think there's a whole community, like I mentioned, that kind of is built around it. There's a lot of other steps towards building an app than just shipping it to Apple. So how do you kind of work those steps into the process and automate those things that are usually humans have to kind of think about as they create these builds?
So what are some of the radical things that people can do with Fastlane, right? So like, I think even if you've never used it, you've heard of it, right? And understand like, oh, I can build my mobile apps with it, right? Like, what are some of the cool things that you've seen people have done with it so far? And like, maybe things that we can all get excited about, just being like, oh, I had no idea that I could do that.
Yeah, I think one thing I think is really cool is, I kind of touched on this before, but just the automation of things that like humans had to do before. So maybe when you're shipping a new build, you have to go in and bump the version number from 1.0 to 1.1. As you're shipping it to test flight, you're like, oh, I need to bump from build number 100 to build number 101. After I finish the build, I have to take my DSIMs and my source maps, and I have to post them to my crash reporting services. And it's just a lot of that human overhead that you kind of have to think about when you're doing this. And if you can make a computer do this for you, like that frees up your human head to do some more cooler things. So I think there's like a ton of really interesting things that you can just kind of think about as you're releasing your apps. You're like, man, why did I have to do this as a developer? How do I teach the computer how to do this? And Fastlane is really good at doing that because the community has already built all of these plugins, all of these actions already to kind of help you leverage this as you're creating your builds.
So what are some of the pain points that we are running into that Fastlane kind of handles for you? I know that I've deployed a few apps to the App Store, and depending on whether you're on iOS or Android, the steps are a little different. But typically, you're doing things like uploading screenshots, uploading icons, building a bundle, or building an APK or IPA file using like a release version of your app. Like, what are some of the things that Fastlane will do that kind of like you don't have to do anymore, I guess, now?
Yeah, that screenshots one is a great one. I love that feature of Fastlane. If you can kind of think about what your app's presence looks like on these app stores, you may have 3, 4, 5 screenshots that you need to take. And if you think about all the devices that you need to make screenshots for, maybe you have, the smaller iPhone, the bigger iPhone, you have an iPad, you have this Android device, that Android device. And if you have to go through and create all of those screenshots, it's kind of cumbersome to go into your app, log into your app, take a screenshot, click on a new screen, take a screenshot, click on another screen, take a screenshot. Okay, that was one device down. And now I need to go to a second device and repeat that whole process all over again. If that's something that you're doing manually, how can we make a computer do that? The answer is Fastlane. Fastlane has a really awesome screenshot capability where you can set up one kind of flow of screenshots of, okay, click on this element and take a screenshot, click on that element and take a screenshot, and then spin up 8 simulators and take all of your screenshots in one go. That's the coolest feature. You end up with a folder just full of screenshots, all well organized by device. And then you can even have Fastlane upload those screenshots when you submit your builds too. I think, tying all of those manual metadata pieces around how do I create a presence on the App Store based off of my app, having Fastlane really automate those things for you and keep your app, your metadata up to date as you're shipping your builds is really cool.
By the way, this is Gant. I am in love with Fastlane, by the way. I fell in love with Fastlane by being burned so hard by trying to figure out how to release for several days on both iOS and Android. And then once, fortunately, stumbling upon Fastlane, I can tell you a great success story is that we had put in the plugin, and that's a beautiful thing, is to have all these wonderful plugins, to automatically take the app icon and resize it to all the necessary sizes and put that inside the app, which was really, really great. And then, funny enough, Apple changed the icons that you needed to have. And it was something ridiculous. And I needed to have these new sizes. And I was going to bug our designers. I was going to mess with some other people. And then I said, you know what? Let me see if this actually works. I updated the plugin. It was already there with all the new features that I needed to get the sizes for the icon. Then with zero actual worry or wit or it's why is this not built in? I was able to go ahead and rerun my release script, got brand new icons put in there, and then released to the store. And that's sort of that is a success story. When you say the communities around this, I've never seen a community as on top of bugs, issues, and fixing things faster and more friendlier than both Apple and Android before.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think along those lines, one other icon related story too. At my previous job, we used to ship a build every night. This our nightly build. That would be basically to cut master, push it out to our kind of internal distribution service, and just let folks play around with whatever might not be released in the App Store yet. But this was a completely different app than the production app. And so we needed a way to kind of signify on people's phones that this isn't the production version of the app. This isn't the App Store version of the app. And lo and behold, there's a Fastlane community plugin to add a little beta badge to the corner of your app icon that is completely automated. And it was as easy as dropping in a new action into your Fastlane lane. And so we said on nightly builds, run this new action to apply this little badge that says beta on it or nightly on it. And that would be what shows up on our testers' phones. So they would know just by looking at the app icon what build they were using. It was completely community driven. We didn't have to do any kind of extra lift to figure out, okay, where does this fit into our workflow? No, we're already using Fastlane. So just drop a new action in there and you can kind of compose together all these different lanes to get the things you need.
That's sick.
Yeah.
So does all this work well with React Native too? I remember back a couple of years ago, there was support, but it wasn't as cool as support for Swift and Android, right? Do you know if things have gotten better with just the React Native ecosystem and Fastlane?
Yeah, I think this is kind of a constant struggle with a lot of the React Native community as well, is how do we create something that's really easy to maintain from somebody who might not have a ton of native iOS experience. And I think we're already starting to see it kind of with React Native Core being, okay, how do we create better tooling with just the specific tooling around our repo itself. And so I think Fastlane has kind of taken this more hands-off approach when it comes to React Native. They're as long as your iOS stuff works, as long as your Android stuff works, we don't care if you're using React Native or not. So I think there's definitely some like actions along the way that are trying to, be specific towards apps that use React Native. Like there's like a Yarn plugin now for Fastlane, so you can Yarn install or run arbitrary Yarn scripts as part of Fastlane. But I think they're still trying to, force your native code to handle starting the packager. It should be still like an Xcode build script and things like that.
Fastlane to me feels like Ruby. Just also in the fact that they're just creative with their naming, they're creative with like their error messages. And so if you came from native and Swift, when you kind of hit Fastlane and a lot more of the Ruby development that kind of goes under there, was there any friction, or was it actually easier? Or, for other people who might be coming from other languages, looking at Ruby might seem like a problem. For me, it's a pleasure, but I'm interested in your perspective.
Yeah. I think when Fastlane came out, there was definitely like, weird tension in the community of like, oh, but it's not written in Objective-C. Oh, this is kind of weird, like this weird other language. But there is this weird like cultural coupling of Ruby and iOS for some reason. I think like there was a lot of people kind of, initially getting started with iOS might have had a little bit of Rails experience in the past. And I think that's kind of like where you see a lot of the initial contributions to Fastlane kind of came from, or people who had some familiarity with Ruby and could kind of dive in and tweak some variables here or there, create some new actions, stuff like that. And I think it kind of took a little bit of like selling amongst the iOS community to be like, hey, this is a good tool because it does some really good things, even if it's not written in Objective-C. So I think there was definitely some really awkward tension at the beginning of Fastlane's lifetime around, this is not a language that iOS developers are familiar with, yet a large amount of like Ruby code is being run to do all of this. So I think a lot of iOS developers kind of like dove in. They're like, okay, I'll learn a little bit of Ruby so that I can understand how these things all fit together. And I think CocoaPods also helped out a ton of this too. CocoaPods is a massive Ruby code base that what a lot of iOS engineers use to grab native dependencies and kind of integrate them into their apps. And so I think like having these big amount of Ruby tooling supporting an iOS community was something that really folks weren't really super happy about to get started, but they learned to kind of, love Ruby and love the output that they get from all this really awesome tooling.
Interesting. I've never heard that story at all, actually. That's pretty cool. And like I keep hearing the word community, and I keep hearing that involved in this discussion. Is Fastlane like an open source project, or is it like how do you use it? Do you pay for it? And if you do pay for it, like who is the community? Is it a combination of the company and the people that are using it, or like, how does the community work there?
Yeah, Fastlane is totally open source. All the code for Fastlane is completely open source. Check out the Fastlane org on GitHub. Everything is there. In addition to the existing Fastlane GitHub org, Fastlane has a great plugin architecture where you can kind of create your own plugins and pull them in from different places. So again, using like Ruby gems to pull in other actions is a great way to kind of, leverage that community of all of this different tooling. The Fastlane community has definitely been driven by a few organizations over the last few years. It was initially open source as from this guy, Felix Krauss, who's a fantastic iOS engineer and kind of worked with a few other people, and then joined Crashlytics, which is a iOS crash reporting company. And so he worked on the Crashlytics team and the Twitter team to kind of get all of these things integrated together. And then Crashlytics moved from being owned by Twitter to being owned by Google. So Felix and his crew that were working on Fastlane inside of the Crashlytics at the time kind of moved over to working at Twitter for a while, which was really interesting. And watching Fastlane kind of stick around and have the staying power, no matter like that the core maintainers of Fastlane were moving from this company to that company, or different kind of, companies were kind of putting their fingers into the different things. It's really like speaks volumes that the project still had a solid vision and still continued moving forward, even though the core maintainers were kind of shifting from different priorities or different companies.
I did notice that, like when I was first messing around with Fastlane, I saw a lot of like Felix, like the name would come up like so often, and, like even just like, I was like, oh, like the generating screenshots thing that you were talking about, I was like, oh, he had a sick article about how to generate screenshots, right? And I think a lot's changed since then, but like, I think one of my favorite parts of using it, even though I've only used it like a couple times, is just being able to like Google something and like having something from like a community leader pop up that makes it really easy for me to follow along into something that I've never used before and like not fuck it up.
Yeah, totally. I think another really awesome thing that the Fastlane core contributors implemented inside of Fastlane that I think really helped it take off was the ability to generate new reports from the command line on GitHub. So if you ran your Fastlane and Fastlane crashed, they weren't just like, oh, sorry, it crashed. Like, good luck. They added in a little link that says like, oh, like go report a new issue here. Grab all of this information about the crash that just happened, grab your environment and kind of post that in a new GitHub issue. And that really helped like the community be like, okay, like this is the issue I'm running into personally. How do I get the community's support to like help fix this issue? Yeah, totally. That the whole team there is like super supportive on getting Fastlane to be a better product or a better tool for iOS engineers.
You know, that Fastlane is to this date the only CLI that when something's gone wrong, it goes to GitHub for me and then looks up a couple of issues that already exist and then says, hey, you might be interested in these. I have never seen that before.
Yeah. And it's really cool that like the culture that it creates on GitHub too, because of that. It's not a lot of people being like, +1, I also have this issue, please fix. It's a lot of people being like, oh, like I've seen this before and this is how I fixed it. Like I ran into the same crash and here's how I fixed it for my app. See if this works for you.
That's really, really cool. What is the workflow for implementing Fastlane? Like if you're used to doing all this stuff yourself, like how big of a shift is it to start using Fastlane versus doing it yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think Fastlane, to get started, you can create what's called a fast file, which is essentially like a make file for Fastlane. And the most minimal fast file you can create, I think, is like 5 lines of code or something like that. So you can kind of just set up a new lane, run one action, and that action to get started might just be, hey, I want to create a new .ipa file for my React Native app. I just want to create just that one piece of the output. I don't need to ship it to the App Store to do everything. I just want to create a new binary file. How do I do just that amount? So you can kind of just start with like, what piece of your process do you want to start automating? Maybe it's just making the build. Maybe it's just taking screenshots to get started. And then you can kind of start to, compose those different actions together to create more complex workflows. But it's as easy as creating a new fast file, gem install Fastlane, and starting to figure out what you want to automate, throw that action in there and get started.
So what are some of the most useful things that it does automate that we haven't really talked about? I know we talked about screenshots, icons, generating the IPA and APKs. Is there anything else that's like pretty big?
I'll tell you one thing that I really enjoy about my company's Fastlane setup right now. At Clubhouse, we use Sentry for all of our crash reporting. And we want to do a little bit of housekeeping related to Sentry whenever we create a new build. Sentry has this concept of releases, which are basically version numbers. You could say, okay, this new release created this new crash report, and we started seeing it at this time. And along with that release, we want to attach, our iOS DSYM files, our symbol files, to tell us, what are the obfuscated kind of iOS code that's running here. And we also want to upload our React Native source maps to tell us, okay, what is the JavaScript stack trace that goes along with all of this? And we want to do all of that every time we make a new build, because every time we ship something to our customers, we got to capture that information and make sure that we put it in the tool that we use to maintain the health of the application over time. And so one thing that we do with Fastlane is we automate the uploading of DSYMs from our developer's computer to Sentry as part of our release process. And so being able to kind of tie all of those together in a way that developers don't have to think about it, like it just happens after you make a build. Once you run Fastlane upload, we just put all of the symbols where they need to be.
Yeah, Eli, that actually, to me, that hits the nail on the head, because here's the thing. You have a team of people, and honestly, a release process is extremely complicated. There's just so many different places, and it might vary from like client to client to client. Like this person might need to upload here, that person might need to upload there, or projects. They age out and the way that they had to behave or get set up is different. And the cool thing is, usually that exists in one person's head, but they've got to put all that down into a fast file. And now somebody else who knows nothing about it comes along, and this has just never existed in iOS. Like in iOS, you have the one person who's the gatekeeper, and I love that we don't have that giant bottleneck anymore. That's just genius. And again, I have to say, why it's amazing to me why it doesn't, iOS and Android like kind of mimic Fastlane. Fastlane's always so far out ahead.
Yeah, I think you're starting to see a little bit of Apple and Google starting to say, man, what are some pain points that Fastlane is doing that are our own problems that we've created as like the gatekeepers of the app stores? I think the biggest one that we saw, over the last few years has been Fastlane did a really good job of sharing distribution certificates and provisioning profiles of these things that are normally one person, one computer needs to create, and then that's how you sign every build. We've seen Apple go from being like, you need to manage this, to maybe we can manage this for you. So I think in iOS, Xcode 7 or so, they introduced automatic provisioning profile signing. So Xcode would basically like download these provisioning profiles and sign your apps for you. That was something that Fastlane was automating at the time that like kind of forced Apple's hand there. And you're also starting to see it with the Play Store now. Like the Play Store says, like, if you upload a build, we'll sign it for you once you upload it, which is really interesting to see like that shift in terms of like, what are some things that are complicated for, native developers to do that maybe the services could be automating themselves?
I feel like 50% or more of the questions on Stack Overflow around native development used to be around provisioning profiles, like for iOS up until a couple of years ago.
I almost like ran to the bathroom when I heard Xcode and provisioning profiles. Like it still doesn't sit well in my stomach.
I think there's like a countless number of issues I've solved by just deleting every provisioning profile, restarting Xcode, and seeing if my build works again. It's amazing not to have to think about that anymore.
I have a buddy who works at Apple who's literally been like, dude, I have to fucking reinstall Xcode to get this to deploy.
Wow.
Sounds miserable.
At least his download speed's fast.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just boom, there's the binary. That's a good one, yeah.
So we know what problems it does solve. Is there anything that like it explicitly does not solve that you still kind of like have to do, or if that question even makes sense in this context?
Yeah, I think like that's actually something I thought a little bit about in terms of React Native too. Is a lot of folks in the iOS community really want to automate like unit testing on CI, and I think that's something that like I think the JavaScript community is a little bit further ahead in terms of the tooling on how to do that. It's really easy to use something like Jest in CI and have not have to wait for your app to compile to run your unit tests. And I think like Fastlane doesn't really help in that situation in terms of React Native apps. It's not really super helpful to run Fastlane just to run yarn test in terms of like you don't really need to test against the full compiled version of your iOS app and things like that. So I think in terms of like the React Native community, like Fastlane is really good at helping you deploy and ship your apps, but maybe not necessarily to test your apps.
Damn, that like moment of silence where like, fuck, testing. That's cool though. That's good to know, especially when it comes to, so like when I was thinking about this, I was like, oh, since I'm doing X, Y, and Z already, like, can I make this happen? But, I was also going to ask, like given the type of testing that you're doing, you'd probably need some sort of like API to like press buttons or do certain things, right? And that's where sort of, Fastlane wants you to hand that off to some other utility versus, keeping things to like the single scope of, this is what we're really, really good at. Like you can figure out like your own, testing strategy, on some other platform or whatever, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's like Fastlane has definitely said, if you want to do iOS UI testing, just use XCUI test and we'll give you like a nice little hook in to take screenshots. But you should do that over there. It's not something that we're going to, kind of handle as the kitchen sink of all things.
So I think, and I don't know how much of this goes from like free to paid. I'm assuming a lot of what we've talked about was like the community side of Fastlane, but does Fastlane offer like a paid plan too? Are there additional features and things that a company may use to like make, like you exchange money to save time?
As far as I know, I don't know if Fastlane takes any money from anybody for these things. I'm sure there's probably iOS consultants and Android consultants all over the world who would love to get paid to implement Fastlane for you. But as far as I know, I don't think there's any one specific entity within the community that's like doing paid Fastlane services in any way.
So my question that we haven't really talked about, I don't think, is how does this fit into continuous deployment, continuous integration pipelines and things like that? Like, people like to automate everything these days, like testing, deployment, all of this stuff. Like, where does it fit into that? And how would that work in a traditional company, or maybe even in your company?
Yeah, great question. Great question. I think one thing that is really useful from Fastlane in terms of continuous deployment is if you can automate creating a new deployment with one line of code, like a one command that you run, you can really easily drop that into your CI and your CD, like wherever you see fit. So if you wanted to say, like, every time we merge into master, we want to deploy a new build to test flight, that's something that Fastlane is really good at. You'd be like, okay, Fastlane beta, or Fastlane test flight. I want to make a new build every time on every merge to master in my CI. That's really easy to do. There's also like other ways that you can kind of set up tooling. So one strategy I've used in the past is anytime that there's a new tag, you set your CI up to look for a new version tag. So say I tag a new version in Git, like version 2.0.1. My CI will see that new tag and create a new build and run Fastlane just because of that. So I think it's a matter of where does Fastlane fit into your process too? Like, do you want to be creating a new build on every merge to master? Is that helpful for you as a company? Or do you want to, run a cron drop that runs Fastlane for you every day to make a nightly build? Do you want to say anytime I do a new Git tag, I want to do a new Fastlane build? So I think it's a matter of where does it fit for your company? What are your company's goals in terms of how often you need to create new artifacts to test, and what is most useful for you, and what might be a better cadence to creating new releases? I think like there's also like this concept of kind of, like release trains where your App Store review might take a little time. You might not want to be pushing new builds to go to App Store review on every merge to master, because if you merge to master 10 times one day, like you're never going to get anything reviewed. So if you have kind of like a release cadence or a release train that goes, every 2 weeks, so we make a new build, that's another great place to automate Fastlane too, to say, okay, we know we're going to need to make a new build at the end of these 2 weeks. How do we, snapshot a new build from master at the end of those 2 weeks? And push it to our QA team, who can go take a look at it over there, and then push that to the App Store once the QA team is like giving it the thumbs up. So I think it's like depends on what your company's goals are in terms of what you need automated from your mobile CD.
So the script that runs to build, where would that run? Would that run in like Circle or Jenkins or something like that?
Yeah, totally. I think that's a great place to use Fastlane. Is like, how can you create machines that create reproducible builds versus having some engineer's personal developer laptop that might have like some weird artifacts on it to create these new builds. I'd say, yeah, definitely running Fastlane in Circle CI, Travis CI, Jenkins, all of those things was a great place to use it.
Hey, Gant, do you all do anything with Fastlane and anything like Jenkins there? I'm just kind of curious what your experience is as well.
We love Fastlane. So, spoiler alert, every time Infinite Red delivers a project, we hand it off to our clients with Fastlane fully set up. And the benefit there is because we basically give them a set of commands and then they can release their own app. We can put it in. Most of our clients don't want continuous development deployment at all. So we usually just go ahead and leave it as like a yarn command. And we say like yarn ship Android, yarn ship iOS. And then I think like yarn ship it or something simple like that, just does both. And then comes back and throws a message inside of Slack when it's done. And they're always impressed by that. And little do they know, I mean, we're just riding off the back of what Fastlane's doing. And then, like you said, Eli, there's a good bit of time in setting up all these things, finding the right plugins, making sure everything works. And so that's sort of like where we get the value out of it. And I'm still looking forward to the day when I can contribute back to the open source on it. But there's just, the second I find something, there's 3 people already on top of it. So, so I feel bad how much we get to like actually use this and how little we've given back to it. But I do have 2 blog posts on it, so I'll throw those out in the pics, and that way at least I can help other React Native developers kind of set this up.
Yes, like myself. I was about to ask you for those articles, Gant. That's fucking sick.
You got it.
I think someone, if they wrote the definitive guide to this, whatever this is that we're talking about, the combination, you would probably get like 1 million people to read it.
Oh, wow.
There's an
All right.
awesome blog post too from this guy, Carlos Cuesta, who wrote a whole blog post about using React Native and Fastlane together to ship both to the iOS App Store and the Android App Store, which is basically like, how do I create the most minimal number of Fastlane commands to be able to do it for both locations? It's a really good blog
Oh,
post.
perfect.
Yeah.
We have to link to that. What's his name?
Carlos Cuesta. I'll drop the link for you.
So I think we're kind of getting close to being finished on time. Is there anything that we wanted to touch on that we haven't already covered?
I guess I have one thing too, is on Fastlane, there's a page for React Native. That's kind of a link to like the blog post that I was just talking about, Carlos Cuesta's blog post, links to another conference talk, I think that somebody gave, maybe from Callstack, I think somebody gave a talk about it last year. But this is an open source page. So if you write some really cool blog posts or you have some interesting information about how to use React Native and Fastlane, open a PR up to this React Native page and let the community know, because the best way to get more information out about how to use these things together is to put that information right next to the documentation for the tool that we're using. So that's like a really great place to, collaborate and communicate, and it's open source too, so it's as easy as submitting a pull request.
All right, so I think that wraps up this episode. Let's go ahead, I guess, and jump to the picks. Gant, do you have any picks today?
Yeah, I'm going to go with, so like I said, we're a huge fan. I have 2 blog posts. One of them is called Fastlane Simple React Native iOS Releases. And that explains how to go through the entire process of getting Fastlane set up. I also use Fastlane in that to go create my certificates and basically take care of all the stuff. I don't have to open a single window. And also, of course, Apple's moving things around on me and buttons all the time. And if I do it via Fastlane, it's always stayed the same. So I have that blog post. And then I have another one called Simple React Native Android Releases. And they're both orchestrated around creating a team system, not like getting the fast one, but basically what we actually tend to ship with. So that way anybody else can kind of pull down the certificates as needed. And then also there's the manual processes you have to do to go ahead and get everything set up to automatically deploy through the Play Store. I have all those screenshots and everything. And sure enough, I'm going to add it to the Fastlane docs pretty soon as well. But those 2 blog posts, hopefully they'll be in the show notes. If they're ever out of date or wrong or something's off, let me know. I like to keep these are 2 blog posts I like to keep as up to date as possible. Oh, and also, of course, go to Chain React.
Awesome. When is Chain React? Yeah.
Yeah, when is it?
July 11th and 12th, and you've got workshops on the 10th, and it's coming up. Portland, the U.S. React Native Conference. It is always a blast. Actually, I will not be the MC this year for the first time in forever because I will be having a lovely little baby girl. And so,
congratulations.
Thank you.
Holy.
I'm super excited about this. So I'm really sad I won't be there at Chain React, but I mean, you can understand, of course. But I will be sending 2 amazing MCs in my stead, and we're going to be announcing them soon. It's going to be a blast. So it's going to be really cool. I hope everybody is excited about Chain React. I will be watching it from afar.
Awesome. Love Chain React, and congrats. Peter, do you have any picks?
I just have DraftBit as a pick. DraftBit.com is a way to visually build your mobile apps. There's been a lot of excitement for the community lately. We're working through navigation and data right now, so it's becoming a much, much more powerful tool than just building layouts. If you are interested, DM me on Twitter, and I'll Fastlane you. Oh, that was so good. And you'll get into the platform faster.
Awesome. Yeah, +1 for DraftBit. I tried it out. It's really cool. Eli, do you have any picks?
Yeah, totally. On that note, you should go check out Clubhouse at clubhouse.io. Project management software focused at software engineering teams. Our app uses React Native, which is really cool. So would love you to check it out and give me any feedback that you have about how we can build better project management tools.
Awesome. And I guess for my pick, I will pick hypebeats.dev. It's a collaborative beatbox that I built using Ken Wheeler's drum machine, I guess you'd call it. And it allows you to kind of create beatboxes and share them with people. And then you can It's using GraphQL subscription, so you can actually like collaborate to create a drum machine and then share that with people. And it's using AWS AppSync as the GraphQL backend, and you can actually clone the entire project, check out the code, deploy it yourself. It's pretty cool. And it's at hypebeats.dev. You can go to my GitHub profile and see the GitHub repo there as well. Well, I think that wraps up this episode. So, Eli, thank you for coming on. That was really great. And this was actually, I think we covered everything you could possibly cover in this amount of time. So I think it was really good.
Thanks for having me. It was really awesome. I love chatting about Fastlane. And I think there's a ton more that you can read into in the documentation about stuff that we didn't even get to cover today. There's some really interesting stuff deep down into Fastlane as well.
So where can people find you online?
You can find me online. I am _ Eli Perkins on Twitter. I am Eli Perkins everywhere else on the internet.
All right. Well, that's it. That wraps up this episode of React Native Radio. Thanks for listening, and we'll see everyone next week.